Have you ever picked up a yarn in a shop, came home, cast on, and then wondered why knitting suddenly felt so difficult? Chances are it wasn't your technique, it was the fiber, because the fiber you choose makes an enormous difference. And today I'm going to help you navigate that. I have ranked 12 different natural fibers from the most beginner-friendly all the way to advanced, covering wool, cotton, silk, alpaca, cashmere, and more. So you always know exactly what to reach for, whatever your skill level. Starting with easy. First, let's talk about the most popular fiber in the world, which is merino. Merino sheep originally come from Spain, but today they are primarily raised in Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Argentina, and Uruguay. And Australia is the main producer of merino wool in the world, which is why most of the merino yarns that you find in your local yarn shop come from Australia. But here's something really interesting. The softness of merino varies enormously depending on where the sheep are from and how they are raised. So Australian merino is famous for being exceptionally fine and soft, and this one here is from Argentina. And a German merino like this one that I've hand dyed myself has a much more rustic and characterful quality to it. The breed is the same, but they feel very different. Neither is better, they just have different qualities and are suited for different projects. And just a quick heads up, you will be seeing a lot of yarns from the German yarn company Pasquali all throughout the video. The reason for that is that they gifted me a couple of their yarn bases as samples, but this is not a sponsored video, so just that you know. What I also wanted to mention about merino is that it has a wonderful elasticity. Let me see if I can show you. So this makes it very comfortable to knit with, and it also means that the stitches even themselves out when you block them after knitting, so small inconsistencies are not going to show as easily, and it also comes at a number of different price points. Next up we have Icelandic wool, and Icelandic wool is one of my personal favorite yarns for beginners. It has a completely different feel and texture from merino. Let me see if I can show you. It is a lot more rustic and has a nice grip, and it's also very springy, which makes it great to knit, especially if you are a beginner and are wanting to knit some color work, for example. So the yarn that I just showed you is Lechtlopi from the Icelandic company Istex, and I in fact knitted my very first sweater with this yarn. So this pattern is called Strokkur, and it is a design by Isolde Teague, and it was my very first time knitting color work, and as you might be able to see, it looks rather even, although I did not know what I was doing at all. So it is more on the rustic side, like I mentioned. That's something to keep in mind for sure. But if you are looking for a beginner-friendly fiber and don't mind a bit of roughness, I can definitely highly recommend Icelandic yarn. Icelandic wool is also a great place to talk about something that hugely influences how a yarn feels to knit with, and that is how it is spun. Generally, yarn can be spun in two different ways, worsted and woolen spun. Worsted spun means that the fibers are combed parallel before spinning, and that means that the yarn this creates is very dense and very even, and gives you a great stitch definition as well. And the other option is woolen spun, which means that the fibers are more loosely arranged and there is a lot of air trapped in the spinning process, which means it creates a very lofty and springy and lightweight yarn like Lechtlopi, which just gives you a very different quality of knitted fabric once you work with it. And there is another option, which is unspun yarn, but we are going to talk more about that later on, because this is a more advanced way of creating a yarn and knitting with it. And then we have Shetland yarn, and Shetland wool comes from the Shetland sheep, which is a hardy native breed to the Shetland Islands, which are off the coast of Scotland, and it has one of the longest knitting traditions in the world. With regards to its quality, it sits somewhere between merino and Icelandic yarn. It has a bit more character and rustiness than merino, but is for sure not as rusty, and also smoother than Icelandic yarn. Like Icelandic, Shetland is typically woolen spun, which gives it that lovely loft and bounce we just talked about. And it has a natural elasticity as well that makes it very forgiving to knit with, and it also blooms beautifully after washing. So your finished fabric will often look even better off the needles than on them. It is also traditionally used for color work, so Fair Isle patterns are usually knitted with Shetland yarn, which makes it a wonderful step up once you are comfortable knitting with merino yarn. Intermediate. Now we're moving into intermediate territory. Now all of the fibers I'm going to mention here are still wonderful to knit with, but they just require a bit more attention, whether it's because they just behave a bit differently on the needles, they come with special care requirements, or some of them just have a higher price point, which means you generally want to be a bit more mindful and intentional when knitting with them. Cotton is probably the most surprising fiber in this category because it is so common, so widely available and affordable. But cotton is a plant-based fiber, which means it behaves very differently than a wool, which is a protein fiber, and that can catch some beginners off guard. The key difference is that cotton has no elasticity whatsoever. Unlike wool, it doesn't spring back, which means every tension inconsistency will show in your finished fabric. It also has no memory, so it can feel quite stiff and unforgiving on your hands, especially over longer knitting sessions. And these are two lovely examples of how different cotton yarns can look and feel. First, we have Suave by Pasquali, and this one is a very unusual cotton yarn. It has like a halo, almost like a cashmere or a silk mohair yarn. And it also feels very different than a typical cotton. And this is due to the fact that the fibers are more loosely arranged in this yarn, and there is a kind of like a cotton mesh tube around the fibers. And on the other hand, we have DMC Baby Cotton, and this is also a 100% cotton yarn, but has this very classic matte look and the dry feel of a standard cotton yarn. Cotton is especially great for summer knitting. It is breathable, it is easy to care for because you can simply throw it in the washing machine along with the rest of your laundry. It also gets softer with every wash, and in fact the top that I'm wearing today is made out of 100% cotton yarn as well. And I also like to use it for garments for my daughters because they tend to be a bit more sensitive towards wool, so I like to make summer dresses for them out of cotton yarn and also some tops. Cashmere is one of those fibers that has an almost mythical reputation around it, and I think for good reason. Cashmere comes from the undercoat of the cashmere goat, which lives in China, Mongolia, and the Himalayan regions of Asia. The goats do not get shorn, they get combed during molting season when they shed anyway. And one goat produces only around 150 grams of cashmere fiber per year. So you can really see why they are so precious. I have 3 examples of cashmere yarns here, and let me tell you why I placed it in the intermediate category. Not because it is difficult to knit with, because it really isn't. It has a very nice halo, it's very soft, and it also has a nice elasticity to it, but just because it is a bit more on the pricey side. Because if you purchase a pricey yarn like this, you really want to be very intentional with what you knit with it and how often you want to frog and reknit this yarn. These 3 Pasquali cashmere yarns show you how much variety exists within a single fiber. You have Cashmere Delizia, which is a chunky, airy blend, Cashmere Lace that is incredibly fine and delicate, and Cashmere 628, which is a classic sport weight and is amazingly soft and also has this beautiful light halo. Each one knits up differently, which is part of what makes cashmere such a fascinating fiber to explore once you're ready for it. Alpaca is another fiber with a devout following, and once you have knitted with it, I think you're going to understand why. Alpacas have been farmed for thousands of years, and they come from Peru, Bolivia, and the wider Andean region of South America. Alpaca is extraordinarily soft, has a beautiful natural sheen and drape, and is actually warmer than wool by weight, which makes it wonderful for cozy drapey garments. It's also naturally hypoallergenic, which is great news for knitters who find wool a bit scratchy. The yarn of the sweater you can see me wear here is a blend of 70% alpaca, 20% silk, 10% cashmere, and I think you can really see the drapiness of that beautiful yarn. So why did I place alpaca in the intermediate category? There are two reasons for that. And the first one is that alpaca has very little elasticity compared to a sheep wool yarn. And that means you have to be a bit more aware of your tension. And the second reason is the fact that alpaca is so drapey that it tends to grow a lot when blocking. So especially if you're knitting something like a lace pattern, for example, and you're not aware of that, the garment can stretch a lot in the length when you block it. And this, of course, is a very frustrating part of knitting with alpaca if you are not aware of it. If you know beforehand and can take it into account, I think alpaca is a wonderful and very soft fiber to work with. These two Pasquale yarns show the range beautifully, I think. We have alpaca lace that is incredibly fine and perfect for delicate shawls, while alpaca fino has a bit more body and is lovely for lightweight sweaters, for example. Both have that characteristic soft halo that alpaca is known for, which, as we'll later see, can be either a feature or a challenge depending on the fiber. Yak is one of those hidden gems that I don't think enough knitters know about yet. It comes from domestic yak that live in Mongolia, Tibet, and the higher altitude regions in general of the Himalayan plateau. And like the cashmere goats, the yak are combed during molting season by hand, which makes yak a more precious and rare fiber. A brand that offers 100% yak yarn as well as different blends is My Yak. And in terms of how it feels and knits up, yak is wonderfully soft. It's often compared to cashmere, but with a slightly more substantial, grounded quality to it. It has a natural warmth that's truly exceptional, which makes sense given the extreme conditions the animals live in. It sits in the intermediate category like cashmere due to the same reasons. It is not as widely available. It is a bit more expensive, so you really want to be mindful when knitting with it. And it also has a little less elasticity compared to wool, which means you have to pay more attention to your tension. Yak is also increasingly found in blends. A yak and merino blend in particular gives you the best of both worlds, like you can see here. The warmth and softness of the yak with the elasticity and forgiveness of merino. That is definitely a blend I think is worth seeking out. Camel is another fiber that surprises people both in the way it feels and how it knits up. It comes from the Bactrian camel, so the two-humped version that lives in Central Asia and Mongolia. And like yak and cashmere, the camels are combed during molting season to collect the fibers. The first thing you'll notice about camel fiber is that distinctive warm sandy color. It is one of the natural fibers that is genuinely beautiful undyed. And the example I have here is Pasquale's Camel Decay, which is dyed, but it is still a very lovely example, I think. There is a natural warmth and beautiful depth to the colorway. In terms of knitting experience, I think camel is very pleasant to work with. It is soft, smooth, and has a very beautiful, subtle sheen to it. I hope you can see that here. It is similar to alpaca, I would say. It is also very lightweight and drapey, and also has this lack of elasticity, so taking care of your tension is important as well. It sits in the intermediate category primarily because of availability and price. It is a bit more difficult to find, so if you have found a source, I think it is very well worth giving it a try if you are interested. It also blends beautifully with silk and merino, which gives you truly the best of both worlds, a very structured, smooth and shiny yarn that I think is definitely worth trying. Advanced. Now we are into advanced territory. The fibers that I will talk about here definitely demand your full attention, either because they are a bit more challenging to knit with, or that mistakes are not as easy to correct, or simply that you need a bit of experience to handle the fiber properly. But if you are up for it, I think they are also the most beautiful and rewarding fibers to work with. Silk is one of the oldest textile fibers in the world, and knitting with it is genuinely a unique experience. And unlike the other fibers we already had a look at, it does not come from animal coats, and it also does not come from plants. It's the filament produced by silkworms to spin their cocoons, primarily in China, India, and Japan, where silk production has been practiced for thousands of years. The first thing you'll notice about silk is that extraordinary drape and sheen. The tee that I'm wearing here in Knitting for Olive's Pure Silk shows it beautifully. There is a liquid quality to the fabric that no other fiber can replicate. It's also surprisingly strong and has a natural temperature regulating quality that makes it wonderful for garments worn close to the skin. What's worth noting is that not all silk yarns are the same, and this will significantly affect your knitting experience. The most commonly known silk is mulberry silk, produced by cultivated silkworms fed on mulberry leaves, reeled from the cocoon as one long continuous filament. And this gives you that classic, smooth, lustrous yarn with extraordinary drape and sheen that silk is so famous for. But there is another type of silk that has more texture and character to it, and that is bourette silk. Bourette silk is made from shorter fibers that are left over in the silk production process or from hatched cocoons, which makes it a more ethical way of silk production. Bourette silk has more of a slubby and matte quality to it than what you would usually expect from a silk yarn. It still has a lot of drape, but it does not have that extraordinary sheen that you would generally expect from a silk. And this is Knitting for Olive's Pure Silk, which is a bourette silk. So why is silk advanced? Regardless of the type, silk has very little elasticity, so tension inconsistencies show immediately. It can also be slippery on the needles, and frogging is something you really want to avoid. But in a blend, like a merino silk or a cashmere silk, you get the gorgeous sheen and drape with much more forgiveness. So that's a lovely way to get acquainted with silk before committing to a pure silk project. Linen is one of the oldest fibers in human history. It has been found in ancient Egyptian tombs and has been cultivated in both Europe and the Middle East for thousands of years. It comes from the flax plant, and extracting the fiber is quite labor intensive. Pasquale's linen bloom is a beautiful example of how linen yarn looks like. It is dry to the touch, a bit more on the rough side, and has a subtle texture to it. Linen also has a lovely matte finish and a crispness that gives knitted fabric a wonderful structure and body. So why does linen sit in this category? Like cotton, it does not have any elasticity whatsoever, but it takes that quality even further. It is rather stiff, which can be a bit uncomfortable to work with, especially during longer knitting or making sessions. And it also is so crisp and rigid that it can be a bit annoying to frog and then reknit. But linen does have a wonderful quality, and that is that it gets softer and softer with every wash. So if you're in the process of knitting something with a linen yarn and are not really enjoying it that much, please keep in mind that the end result is definitely going to be very worth it, and it also blends beautifully with both cotton and merino, giving you the best qualities of the different fibers combined. And I also want to mention that I personally think knitting is wonderful to wear, especially during hot summer days, because it is so breathable and temperature regulating. So I love to wear linen fabric all throughout the summer. And in fact, I also like my bed sheets to be out of linen. I always sleep in 100% linen fabric, both in the winter and in the summer, because it is cooling in the summer and warming in the winter. It is just a lovely fiber overall. Angora is one of the most distinctive fibers in the world, and it is also one of the most divisive. It comes from the Angora rabbit, not from the Angora goat, and has a beautiful soft feel to it and a wonderful halo as well. So what makes it advanced? There are a few things. First, that beautiful halo makes it very difficult to see your stitches while you're knitting. So for an experienced knitter, that is manageable, but for someone who is still developing their technique, it can be a bit more challenging. And second, and more critically, angora is almost impossible to frog. So once those fine fibers have been knitted and the halo has bloomed, trying to unpick and reknit will almost certainly ruin the yarn. So you really need to get it right the first time. Angora also has the tendency to shed, and that is definitely worth noting. So that is why you rarely find a 100% Angora yarn. It is usually blended with a different fiber like merino, which gives you again the best of both worlds. But if you do want to knit a project with a 100% Angora yarn, I would recommend knitting something a bit more easy, like a cowl or a hat maybe, where you know upfront that you won't need to frog it. Mohair comes from the Angora goat, and yes, that is a bit confusing. So Angora fiber comes from the rabbit and mohair fiber comes from the Angora goat. And it is cultivated mainly in South Africa, Turkey and the United States. And mohair is specifically known for that beautiful, luxurious halo. Pure mohair is rarely used alone in knitting. It's very wiry and can feel scratchy against the skin, and like Angora, it's very difficult to frog once the halo has bloomed, which is why the silk mohair blend has become one of the most beloved yarns in contemporary knitting. The silk adds smoothness, drape and structure, while the mohair contributes that magical halo and lightness. So together they create something very special. And this brings me to something I have been weaving in all throughout the video, and that is blends. A blend which consists of 2 or more fibers mixed together is not just a compromise with different fibers, it actually is better than each fiber alone. So for example, with the silk mohair blend that I already mentioned, you would not get this beautiful drapiness, lightness, halo and softness of either a silk yarn or a mohair yarn alone. You only get it when you blend the 2 fibers together. So why did I put mohair in the advanced category? The reason is that the halo makes it a bit more difficult to see your stitches properly. It is also a bit slippy, it is challenging to frog. And to counteract these properties, you often see a silk merino yarn held together with a merino yarn, but of course holding 2 different strands of yarn together adds another level of complexity. Do you remember back at the beginning when I talked about worsted and woolen spun fibers and I mentioned that there is a third category? Let's talk about that now, and that is unspun yarn. So unspun yarn is basically yarn that is not spun at all. It is basically just a loose strand of fibers that is gathered together, and that makes it so challenging to knit with. The most well-known unspun yarn in the knitting world is probably Plötulopi by Istex. It's an Icelandic yarn that has been used for traditional lopapeysa sweaters for generations. And another well-known brand for unspun yarn is Hönöroeyr, which is a Swedish company, and they create the popular Nutiden yarn that I've talked about in many of my videos. Unspun yarn looks almost impossibly delicate, and in a sense it is. It breaks very easily if you pull it, which means your tension needs to be completely consistent and your movements deliberate and gentle. So frogging is pretty much not an option. You really have to make a proper gauge swatch, get your tension right and then commit, because once you have knitted up the fabric and the fibers have started to slightly felt together, it is pretty much not possible to unpick. But here's the thing about unspun yarn. The finished fabric is absolutely extraordinary. You have that lightness, warmth, halo. I think nothing else comes close to that. The lopapeysa tradition exists for a reason. And unspun yarn is the ultimate reward for everything you've learned as a knitter. When you feel ready for it, it's one of the most memorable knitting experiences you'll ever have. You might have noticed that I have focused entirely on natural fibers today, and that was a very deliberate choice because natural fibers are at the heart of everything that I make and everything that I believe about slow and sustainable fashion. And that does not mean that synthetic fibers do not have a place in knitting, especially fibers like nylon and acrylic have real advantages to them, especially for people who might have allergies towards wool, but they are just not part of my knitting world, and that's why I did not include them. Choosing the right fiber can definitely transform your knitting experience, and I hope this video gave you the inspiration and motivation to try out something new next time you're standing in your yarn shop. So my best advice for a beginner knitter would be to start with a merino yarn, get comfortable with the feeling of knitting, and then just let your curiosity guide you from there, because every fiber has genuinely a very unique quality and feel to it, and I think this is truly the joy of being a lifelong knitter. There is always so much to learn and to explore. And if you like this video, I also think you are going to enjoy this one. So see you next time. Happy making. Take care. Bye.